Okay, Robert Hoffman is here. Hello, Robert. This is he. He's also a member of the K&N Railroad Club, and he's lived in Louisville before, but he left for about how many years? Left for 20 years, went out west to make his fortune. He's come back. He has enough money now to build a layout, and he's actually in his second. He bought a home in Louisville, but then he bought another one, which is perfect for his layout. So now he's working on his layout, and he thought it would be a good time to share this subject, handling track foam to finish. Robert?
Okay, thank you. The title of the clinic is a little misleading in that it says it's about, yes.
Ron, are we going to have Robert move, or are you going to move the?
So I'm going to run the slideshow.
Okay, well, we got to get him on a camera somehow.
Nope. Yeah, it's fine. I don't have a good side. Okay, anyway, so it says hand laying track, and actually that's sort of the last step. This covers everything that's above the benchwork up to the rail, because you have to put all that down first. But this came about because at the point I decided to move back here, I had a layout in Sacramento where I lived that had been built several years earlier, and it had been built very fast. The National Convention was coming to Sacramento in 2011, and we literally built the thing on the fly, and I was never happy with it. So afterwards, I went through several experimentations. Assuming I was going to come back here someday, I wanted to build a layout once, and I wanted to try a lot of products, knew which ones I liked, didn't like, etc. So I spent several years tearing down parts of the layout, redoing it with different products and so forth, watching a lot of videos on the internet, how other people did things. And when it came to track laying, I finally came up with a combination of things I enjoyed. And it started with what I would call drainage. So we'll go to the next slide here.
Yeah, we'll be there just a minute.
Okay, before you get started, there's some things to consider about what you're doing, because the way they ballast, what they use for ballast, how rails are laid and everything has changed over the years. There was a time when it was 39-foot rail, it went to welded rail, wooden ties, concrete ties, how much ballast, what color is the ballast, where does it come from. So if you're doing a model layout based on a prototype, you get to know the era, when are you doing it, where are you doing it, what time of year is, that's going to have a lot to do. And your prototype, that's going to say a lot about your rail weight. Is it a main line? Is it a branch? Is it a switching industry? Ballast, that changed. How much ballast, what color the ballast was. Maybe it's tracks are buried in the mud, maybe they're buried in concrete. And the usage, how much, what was on it, how heavy. If you're operating unit grain trains and coal trains and heavy trains like that, you're going to want heavy rail on very good maintained track. Next slide. Okay. Construction materials used for this were, and the people in the room can see them, and I'll show this a little later, are foam. I here put in cork road bed, but you can also use Homosote road bed, and Woodland Scenics has a foam road bed. You can use wooden ties, plastic ties. You can get rails. You can buy flex track. It's all up to you. It depends on what you're doing, your skill level, what's available to you. Do you have help from other people? Do you like being experimental and getting outside your comfort zone and trying to do the next thing? Next slide. Here's some pictures that were taken. The one on the left is in the San Joaquin Valley of California. The one on the right is just up here at Georgetown on the Norfolk Southern. And what I'm trying to show you here is that the tracks, aside from being up on the regular roadbed, are several feet above the ultimate bottom of the topography. This is for drainage. This is in case it rains or there's flooding or anything else. Hopefully the tracks are above where the water is going to settle out. On the picture on the left, I didn't take it with this clinic in mind, so of course the best part's in shadow. But what probably have a good 20 to 25 feet of drop from the bottom of the road, the ballast of the roadbed down to the bottom of the ditch. Then it climbs up on the other side because there's a road there, which I didn't do here. And the picture on the right is somewhat close to what I'm doing here. You have the track, there's no road on the right, so it just slides down from the roadbed to the bottom of this ditch, or on a ditch, it's actually just a regular level plane. But it's high enough up that you would have to have a catastrophic flood to put the rails underwater. And that's one of the first things we're going to get to talk about here. Next slide. Then I also need to talk about track profile. For this clinic, I'm only doing one track, the main line. However, on your layout, you probably have multiple tracks. The picture on the left was taken on the L&N's Old Road in Simpsonville. The building on the right is part of the place where I work, so I got to take these pictures legally, standing on company property. The track on the far left is the main line to Frankfurt. And notice it's the highest. Then we drop down a couple of feet. The track next to that is a siding through Simpsonville. And that's on a raised area too, but not quite as high as the main line. And then there's a spur that used to serve the business here on the right, and it literally is down in the mud. There's weeds and everything else. It hasn't been used in a while. The switch was pulled up, but it sat right down. I doubt there's any ballast or anything there. So if you're building multiple tracks, consider the main line will be the highest. The siding will be a step down, and then if you have something, an industrial area beyond that, that's probably sitting right on the foam. And it would be 3 different levels. The picture on the right was taken in Escalon, California. This shows 2 main tracks, so they're both at the same height. And then to the right of that, I'm standing on what used to be a spur that served all the packing houses on the right. Now that's been pulled up, but again, you can see to get from the main line down to the spur, they drop down 2 or 3 feet. So you're always coming down in height as you come down from the main line. The main line has the best drainage, and as they downgrade the track from that, it gets lower and lower until it's down to it. It might be sitting in the water or in the mud. It might be flooding. Next. Okay, so here's where I started. I started with 2 pieces of 1-inch foam. The one is going to be the berm that the railroad specifically built for drainage. And the other one's going to represent the flat plain, you will, the floodplain, the bottom of the topography. That will sit on top of your benchwork, whatever type of benchwork you use. Now, I set in this case it was cork. I started with cork, but I changed. I started with cork. I glued it right down the middle of the flat part. I cut the berm to a 45-degree angle on either side of the track. And there's a reason for that. There's a website put up by a geological society that will tell you at what angle about 38 different types of dirt will come to rest at. And 45 to 60 degrees was the arc. I thought about downloading that and printing that, but I didn't know it was going to have any copyright issues, so I decided to avoid that. So knowing what that distance would be, I marked the top on either side of the cork, then I marked the bottom, set it down, and I drew those black lines on the base because that's where the bottom is going to sit. And then right down on between those 2 lines. Next photo. So here we are looking at it. Before I cut it, after it was marked. As you can see, I put a pretty straight 45-degree angle on that. The top is where the roadbed will sit, and the bottom is going to sit on the base. You can see from the top, you can see it from the end. You can use a hot wire to do this. You can use a knife. You can use a saw. I like using saws. And the reason is because if you look at these berms, as the water drains, they get ruts and ditches and stuff. And then if you take a hot wire, it's almost too smooth. But if you cut it with a saw, it gives you that rough edge. And it looks like the water has made indentations every once in a while and gives it that rough look. Next slide. Okay, so first thing you might notice is the cork's gone. At this point, I decided to use something called Homosoap. This is a product that had a few moments of popularity about 20 years ago, and the company that was making it went out of business. And I just happened to get on the internet a couple of months ago and find out this stuff is available again. And I have some examples of it here in the box. It's the same length as cork. You can see that's 3 feet. It is tapered. Now for HO scale, they offer it in 5 millimeter, which is main line, and 3 millimeter, which is branch line thicknesses. Maybe you can see it this way. And you can choose the bevel at 45 degrees or 60 degrees. Now I went online and did a little research, and most railroads actually build this to 60 degrees. So that's the one I chose. Now while we're at it, they also make home bed for turnouts. They make them for 2 different sizes, 5 to 7 and 8 to 10. And this one is 5 millimeters, just like the main line. And since most tracks after they come out of the switch, go down grade, they actually make wedge-shaped pieces that'll take you from the 5 millimeter to the 3 millimeter. And they'll take you right into the lower. So you can go right down into your siding. You don't have to sand it down like I've been doing for years. You just glue this in, you get some of the thinner pieces, and when you come out of your turnout, it'll drop right down to the siding, and you'll have the two separate profiles like you saw a few slides ago out here in Simpsonville. Okay, so I didn't take a picture of it. I thought I did, but I didn't. On the base, instead of just gluing the top piece, the berm, I went and got a rasp, and I cut an even deeper drain on either side of the berm, so that the berm, the bottom of the berm, as was cut in the foam, actually sits above the bottom of the drainage, which creates a ditch, so that with water gathers, it will gather in this area here, preferably not here. This might be someone's property, this might be a road, and it certainly won't be up here. And if there is a road, it's likely this will be built up too, and that might be a clinic for another day. And then I glued the berm, I glued the homicide on top of the berm, and I glued the berm on top of the base, put a lot of weight on it, and went to bed, went to work, came back the next night and kept working. Next slide. And it's always good to let this stuff dry about 24 hours. What do you use to glue foam to foam? Anything you want for the most part. They make foam tack glue. That's a little more expensive than using white glue or yellow glue. A lot of people like Gorilla Glue. I don't, because it foams up. I don't care how much weight you put on that. You could park your truck on it. It would find a way to push the two pieces of foam together or pushing them apart. I tried that on one display, didn't like it. I'm not going to use it anymore. But there are all kinds of glues you could use. It's probably a matter of how much and how much you want to spend. Once you're done, and this is important, seal it. You can see it in the picture. You can see it here. I went and got a gallon of latex paint, some earth tone, and painted the whole thing. Why? Because foam shrinks. Over time, foam will shrink. The homobed or the cork or anything else will dry out, which might not be a problem if you put ballast on it right away. That'll also seal it, but I like to do this. Also, what it does is, for some reason, the scenery material, ground cover, gets thin. You're not looking at pink foam, you're not looking at green foam, you're not looking at yellow foam or whatever color comes in. You get this look, and that kind of passes as dirt. Next slide. I'm gonna pass that around. Take a look at it. Moving on. Okay, the next step in handling track is deciding whether you want to use wooden ties or plastic ties, or what is it? What's your preference? I'm fond of the Central Valley tie strips. Here they are. They come in 1 foot lengths. They sell 2 different types, at least an HO scale. They sell what they call the mainline ties, and they sell what's called branch line ties. They're smaller, they're lower, they're spread apart, not all at the same distance. And one of the other things I like is on each end there's a half tie. On this end you have the top half of the last tie. On this end you have the bottom half of the last tie. Then when you want to glue them together, you glue the top half of this one to the bottom half of this one, and now you have 2 feet continuously. I will do this up to 3 feet. After that, this piece of plastic is connecting everything to no longer withstand the weight usually it breaks. And because there's plastic, only one side you can bend the track. Go around curves, whatever you want to do, okay? And there are fish plates built into the ties at the proper place, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about getting the proper spacing. Next. Okay, now before we start getting into rails, everything, I want you to take a very good look at the coloring. I want you to notice that ties and rails do not weather to the same color of brown. This photo was taken out in Georgetown, across the river. This is Norfolk Southern Line, St. Louis. Notice that the ties are a slightly darker color. They used to be treated with creosote, which is black. It's a oily material, tar-like. Over the years, that seeps out in the heat and the weather, and it weathers to a dark brown color. In a main line, it's likely most of the ties are about the same color because when they come out and replace ties, they do whole sections of track at the same time. On a branch line, it's likely a tie here, two ties there, and you have a whole mixture of colors for the ties. And when using these strips, that's pretty easy to do. You can either sit them down and paint them with a buzz bomb like I did, or you could come along every third or fourth tie and make another color of brown. And that gives you the sense that the ties have been replaced over time. Now, the rails are made of steel and they rust. So that's a more orange color than the ties, which are more of a true brown. Tiles will probably be darker, the rails will probably be lighter, except on the top where they're polished by the traffic that rolls across the top of. So I will get the ties, I'll glue them together about 3 feet, and then I will get them usually with Rust-Oleum's camouflage brown. And then I will take the rails and I will paint them with Tamiya brown. Now I have 2 different colors of brown. Next slide. Okay, now here was another place I thought, if you look at the middle track just to the left, you really see it here. You can really see the color of the ties versus the color of the rails. And part of that's because for once, the sun was in the right place. And it's really showing it up. So you can see the darkness of the ties versus the lighter color of the rails. Now, this was taken about 3 or 4 years ago, and railroads use a lot more ballast now than they used to. If you look at pictures taken in the 40s and 50s, you get to see a lot of tie, especially on the ends. You could just walk on the ties. Then in the 80s, which is the period I'm doing, they basically covered up right to the top of the tie, but didn't go any farther on either side than they had to. These days, they just dump ballast everywhere. It's all over the place. Those of you interested, this picture was taken in Riverbank, California. Okay, next. Now, when you're getting ready to put the tie strips down on the homobed or homosode, I think he calls this product homobed. Notice that, like cork, it comes in a left profile and a right profile, and you put them together, there's a line going down the center. If you look at the tie strips, about every 7th or 8th tie, there's 2 little protrusions on either side of one of the ties. And so what I do is I center that right on that center line, and that puts the tie strip right down the middle of the homosode. Next slide. Now here it is with the ties in place. So all I've done so far is go out, glued some ties together, paint the ties, let the paint dry, centered them on the homosode, and glued them down. Now for gluing ties down, for this particular model, since it was very short and it's never going to do anything, I just used very thin, I mean maybe 2/1000ths of an inch spread of Elmer's wood glue. If I was doing this on a full basement size layout, I would go get an adhesive caulk. Lay it down and get it very, very thin. And you want to get it very thin, otherwise it's going to interfere with the ballast between the ties. But the reason I go with a caulk is because when it dries, it has a rubbery finish. And if the humidity changes or the temperature changes, you don't have that difference in what's called the coefficient of expansion. Cork expands this way, plastic expands this much, nickel silver rail expands this much, and the track is going all over the place. The caulk allows the materials to slide a little bit on each other, just enough so that from summer to winter, your railroad is still usable. The track is not going to get torn up. Okay, next slide. All right, now at this point, you might be wondering about, well, the berm didn't fit exactly on top of the base, and we need to do some cosmetic work, and it's not going to look right. Yes, that's true, and that's where scenery comes in. This is not a course in scenery, although I will mention it a little bit because there are some things to be noted. This is strictly about track and how to put the track on top of the track base. So like I said, this is not a scenery clinic. What this is, just the tracks. Thank you, Jack. Okay, next. Okay, so if you'll notice, where's the clicker? Somebody with the red, I think it is. Okay, right here, this is what I was talking about using a saw. Notice how it made these rough vertical paths here. That looks right for water running off and taking some of the dirt every winter. I don't want that to look smooth. I want that to look rough that way. But notice down here, when you use a saw and you get close to the end of the foam, and actually the teeth will tear off pieces here and so forth. That doesn't look so great. Now, there's a couple of things you can do to get rid of that. One, you could use a Woodland Scenics product called foam putty. You can also use spackling paste. Now, foam putty was made for this purpose. Spackling paste wasn't, but I've used it to build roads right on top of foam, so it will not have any sort of a negative influence on the foam. No melting, no toxic fumes or anything like that. You could also, if you're going to use a different type of scenery base, let's say quilt batting. Most of you probably don't know what that is. I had to learn about that on the internet. You can glue that down and it'll cover it. What it looks like is 20 years of leaves and compost is sitting on the ground that's been let go. Okay, next. Here's another module I'm working on in my garage. Here's a case where I've got about 10 layers of foam built up, and it really doesn't matter because look at all the ground cover. There's dirt, there's grass, there's static grass, there's bushes, there's trees, and I use the quilt batting in here as well, although you really can't see it. But this is a case where getting all the foam layers beautifully matched is not important because you can't see it anyway. What you're looking at here, this is a tunnel in Martinez, California on the Santa Fe. This is a bridge bent. I'm working on building this bridge. It'll be about 16 feet long when I'm done. I'm building it piece by piece with evergreen. So before I die, I hope to have the thing done. Okay, next screen. And here's another one I did. This is close to some of the places I've been photographing out in California. Over here on the left, here's the foam with the paint on it. And over here is that quilt bunting or quilt batting. What I do is I take that and I stretch it out thin and I glue it down and then I let it sit and I come back with the same brown paint and I just lather that paint on. And that goes on and that makes that bottom layer of compost, or everyone calls it, just sits there, till nature takes it away. Then going to the other side of this berm, I put static grass on top of that. So the static grass on top of the batting gives you this really neat field look. And there's a tree, there's a road, this is another bridge. So yes, I like bridges. Another example of being up on a berm. This is a very tall berm because we need a 16-foot tall bridge above the road down here. Okay, next. So that's a little bit about, yes.
When you paint, do you use crayon?
Not for this. I like to get either a roller brush or a big cheap brush and literally just put it on like I'm frosting a cake.
Okay.
We'll go through a gallon pretty quick. Just buy a gallon, folks. All right. So for this particular one, I used paint, a paintbrush like this. Now, notice over here on the right, I was careful not to paint the ties. So I stayed down here on the flat area. I'm not worried about the homosote anymore because that's already painted and it's going to get ballast on top of it. But this was important. I painted the angled side of the berm over here. And the reason is because if you try to use Woodland Scenic cement, it's thin, it'll run down, and it'll take the dirt right down too. So what I did is I painted this real heavy. I came about 3 coats of this stuff. I could have combed my hair if I had any of it after I got done, but it was so shiny. Okay, next. Then I came along with the dirt. Now the dirt I use comes from Arizona Rock and Mineral Company, and he uses real dirt. He goes out in the middle of the desert and he gets these rocks and dirt and he breaks them up and he sells it. So I came along and I put it in this cup, and I started by putting it along the edge of the roadbed and built it up a bit, and then I started pouring it on the side of the berm on the angle, and because the paint is so thick, it's stuck. If it doesn't work pouring it from a cup, you can always take a piece of paper and just blow it onto the side, and that works too. Of course, I got the cheap when I was doing this because I could hold it up at an angle like that, but for those of you at home. But you can't do that if you're working on your layout. So you have to be able to put it on at this angle. So that's why I use paint for the first layer. After that's dry, if you want to come back and put more dirt on and use the scenic cement or something like that, that's okay because you have the bottom layer now and it's going to hold it and you can put it on. Okay, Next. Here's the product I use. These are two of my favorite colors. The one on the left is called Kaibab Earth, and the one on the right is called Earth, which is the package I actually use. I brought the lighter one with me today. Now, if you order from Arizona Rock and Mineral, and he has a website, rrscenery.com. Know this, he's one person running a business. So when you order it, you're not going to get it next week. It's probably going to take a few weeks, so build in some lead time. But it's a great product, I love it. Okay, next. So here's the finished. Now keep in mind, there's no glue here. This is just dirt sitting on paint. As a matter of fact, what you're seeing here in this final product, with the exception of the glue I used on the road bed, there's no glue on this at all. This is still just that first layer of dirt sitting on top of the paint. Now down here, you can see this. This is someplace where the paint didn't hold the dirt, and this is a good chance to show you how good that earth-colored paint looks. Because even though the dirt has gone away, it's not pink, it's not blue, it's not yellow, it's still earth-colored, and it doesn't look that bad. Now you can come back and you can touch it up, but this is just the paint, no glue holding all this scenery in place. Okay, next. Now, I put ballast on before I put the rails in. There are a number of reasons for this. One is because I have tried using FlexTrack or putting the rails in first and putting in the ballast, and some of it always gets stuck up in the webbing of the rail. And when I try to clean out the webbing of the rail, I also knock the paint off, and I get this bright, shiny silver piece of rail on the side, which is inaccurate. So I take the cup and I come along and I just literally just sort of tap very lightly like this. Remember, it's always okay to have not enough. Once you get too much, you have problems. So I would like to go back over the same area 2, maybe 3 times. I start by going right down the middle of the ties. You can see. Next slide. Then, if you look at the photo on the right, then I go to the side of the ties and I get the edge of the roadbed. So the center of the ties is taken care of. Now the roadbed is taken care of. Next slide. Probably going to have some high spots, so I just take my finger and I tamp it down so this level of anything standing up. And when I like that look, and I can look down like this, and I can see the tops of the ties, and they're clearly above the roadbed. The roadbed's at a nice angle, and I don't see any bumps. I'm happy. Next. Now it's time to come along, and here's a picture of what it looks like when it's done. The next thing I do is I come along, and I want to glue it in. The problem with using straight glue on, and in this case I'm using Woodland Scenic's light gray fine ballast, is the glue and the ballast combined. The ballast will want to puddle up into these little circles with the drops of the glue, and that doesn't look very good. So what we want to do is break the surface tension. There's 2 ways to do that. I do it with alcohol. Next slide. I use 91%. You can also get 70%. 91 can be hard to find, but I like using 91%. And you can do this 2 ways. You can either take your scenic cement and you can put an eyedropper or 2 of alcohol in it and shake it up. And now it's part of the glue. Or what I like to do is just come along with this is called a pipette. I was going to bring one today, but I forgot. And basically it's just a piece of plastic. They're very cheap. You can get them in bags of about 20 because they won't last very long. And I just put this in the alcohol, soak it up. Next slide. And then I just drip it on. And you can see where the dirt's getting dark. That's where the alcohol, through capillary action, is moving. Now, I use the term capillary action. You don't have to put alcohol on every single square inch because of capillary action, the alcohol will be drawn into the drier parts of the ballast. And you might be able to see here, as I'm putting it on, some of it's washing away. Okay, well, we'll take care of that. Next. This is after the alcohol has been put on. You can see the darkening down here, and that's okay. That's just the alcohol running down the side of the dirt. We won't worry about that. We've got some overspill here, overspill down here. If you're doing an absolutely modern layout, that's probably great. This whole berm might be covered with ballast, depending on where you are, but I'm back in the 80s, and they didn't do it that way back then. Next. After we allow it to dry, then I come along with the Woodland Scenic cement, and like I did with the alcohol, I start dripping it on the ties. Right now, make sure I get a drop between each tie. Then, when that's done, I come along, just like the alcohol, and I go down the side and drop the glue and let it run down. Next. Those little bald spots we had, I just get some of the Woodland Scenics ballast, put it in between my forefinger and thumb, and just drop it on, let it fall down naturally till it covers the area. Might give it another drop of glue, I might not, depends. If it darkens up, it means it got some glue. If it didn't, it means it needs some glue. And then I walk away and I leave it alone. Okay, next. Let that dry for a while. Okay. Now, let's look at the fish plates here. If I was really going to do this to the nines, and I thought about it and just rejected it for this particular project, I would, after I painted the ties the dark brown, I would probably come back and mask off everything but the fish plates and hit them with the Tamiya brown, which would match the rails, because the fish plates, they're also steel and they tend to rust right along with the rails. However, I chose not to do that this particular time. I thought that was getting a little bit ahead of what the project's supposed to be doing. The other thing is, if you're going to come along and put the rails down, I like to spike my rails in. In this case, I used glue because it was only 2 feet, but I generally like to spike my rails in. If you are going to be using this technique, know that you can only use spikes down to code 70. If you use spikes on code 55, the flanges will literally ride up on top of every spike you put on because the rail is getting that small. And the glue that I use, now there's 2 types of glue that are pretty common. One is Walther's Goo, and the other is a product called Barge. And I was introduced to Barge by the guy at Fast Tracks. That's his preferred method of gluing the rails down, and it works quite well. If you're going to use these products, please, 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 do it on a nice day when you can do it outside, or have fans, a well-vented room, open windows, something. I'm not sure about the Goo, but the Barge, the fumes off of that are not good for you. You know, like so many things in this hobby, there are some chemicals in there we could really do without. So have to do it in a very well-ventilated area. And if you start to feel weird or something, put it down, go outside, go somewhere else, get some fresh air. Okay, next. Okay, so basically here we are. We're finished, and that's this in its final form. On the very first day, I could actually go outside when it was warm enough and no rain and no snow to actually take this picture. And you can see there on the left, here's where the paint did not hold the dirt on, but again, because we painted an earth tone, it's not that bad. You can see down here now, if you want to go with scenery, you could put in some weeds and stuff that would exist where they were standing in water or got more water. You could have grass, bushes, anything you want over here. This would probably remain fairly pristine. The railroad's very funny about keeping their main lines in good shape. Weed sprayers, some they still do. They used to burn the weeds. They have these big arms that would shoot fire down on the tracks. That might be against the law now, I don't know. But they're very tricky about keeping their main lines in good shape. So from the edge of the berm all the way up to the rails, you probably wouldn't see too much in the way of weeds or vegetation. And I have a list of things over there on the left, gives you the numbers of some of the products. If you like wooden ties, there's a company called Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. I bumped into them at the St. Louis Prototype Modelers meet a couple of years ago. I go to that every July. He's had a stand there the last 2 years. And much like Central Valley with their plastic tie strips, he has wooden tie strips that are made for main lines. He has them for turnouts. He has them for crossings. And he has an interesting way. On the bottom, he runs a brass strip, and you can connect your rail to that brass strip. And at the end, there's a little piece that sticks down. And you can solder from the bottom of the layout. You never need to see solder on top of the layout where your rail is. Fascinating. What I'm waiting on him to do is come up with a way I can take those wooden ties and bend them around a curve. When he does that, I might consider that. But it's a fascinating product. He has a good website. Please visit and take a look. Next. Okay, and here we are back in California. And this is something I thought about doing but didn't, and you can see there's a road here, and I was going to talk about how to get the road from down where it is up to and across the rails at height. But as you can see, everything here is just at the bottom of the roadbed, and then the berm actually starts right about here at the end of these bushes, and it drops down then. So Where roads cross your track level, the earth is built up, it's at the same height as the, top of the berm. And then once you get about, I don't know, this is probably maybe 25, 30 feet, then it drops away and you've got your drainage there again. Anyway, next. Is that it?
Says end of slide.
Okay, well, that's the end of the clinic.